gets this equal dividend, and there is no testing and no other obligation for them when they want to earn it. Everybody gets it. So here we see that it is correct what I said, that the richer have a bigger CO2 consumption. So that's a picture of European residents, and we see here different branches of CO2 emissions: housing, clothing, services, land travel, air travel, and so on. And if we look at all of these branches, we see that the higher the income, we have here the EU income quintiles, the higher the income, the higher the average carbon footprint is. So that is true even also on a European level. So one short remark at how this eco-taxing should be organized. It should be made at the beginning and at the end. When we use resources at the beginning and at the end of the productive life cycle when things are being used. So at the beginning, at the end, there we need a price, and then automatically this will lead to a certain price rise when we look at the end product. And every thing in the life cycle is integrated: the buying, the running of the product, and at the end, the disposing of the product. And it doesn't matter what kind of product it is, it's the same price rise. Theoretically, these numbers are only examples for sure. The same price rise can come for the end product, a TV screen, or a canoe trip of the family. Very different cultural things, but it doesn't matter. It's product neutral, and it's neutral to the lifestyle. So that's what I want to say. And that's what we need in a modern society, with very different ideas of good life, with different ideas of lifestyles and so on. It's product neutral. Only important is how much CO2 is in this lifestyle. Okay, ecological euro dividend. So taxing at the beginning, at the end, I showed you that. And that is also a psychological advantage. These taxes are paid by companies, not directly by final consumers. Even we all know that is not the whole truth, but I think it's easier to legitimate. The companies pay it, who produce these products, and have to pay when the products are going to the garbage and so on. The difference to the Alaska Permanent Fund is the following. The Alaska Permanent Fund, that's in Alaska, every citizen of Alaska is getting up to $2,000. I don't know the exact amount. It's changed every year from revenues from oil. From a fund which is fed from the oil revenues, oil extraction revenues. And the difference to this principle is here we would have a direct sharing. We don't use a fund, which is depending of capital market performance. And the other difference to Alaska Permanent Fund is that we have here an ecological steering. So we rise the price for scarce resources. They don't do that in Alaska Permanent Fund. They just take the revenues from the public oil extraction without ecological steering taxes. Third, we need for eco-taxing the European scale. We have a common market, and if you would introduce such a scheme on a national level, then yes, the first mover would have disadvantages. And also, there's clear environmental problems are cross-border problems. So a policy beyond the nation state is very needed. And fourth, the redistribution from rich to poor with an individual possibility to switch the status if you behave differently, to switch the status from net payer to net earner would be introduced on a European level. So why starting with a revised EU emission trading system? It's an introduced system, even if it's not running very well because of too many allowances and you know, there are a lot of criticisms. It is introduced and we can make it better as it is demanded from environmental scientists and environmental movement. The current regulation is that the nation states, the member states, have the right to auction a fixed share of the European Union overall allowances following a grandfathering principle, their historical emissions. We could also discuss that, but not here. And they can use the revenues in their national for the national budget. The reform proposal is for this EU ETS, emission trading system, is first to include all sectors, also mobility and housing. That's going on when we look at the European Commission's proposal for fit for 55%. There is integrated a proposal to include mobility and housing in this scheme, to reduce the cap, the amount of allowances every year, to reduce it more than actually, and to auction 100% of the allowances. Now a certain share is given for free. So if we take this reform proposals, I very roughly estimated the overall possible revenue when we take 100 euro for a ton of CO2 as goal. So then in the European Union, 360 billion euros could be earned. And yes, if we include the wished reduction, then we have of 40%, and in the next 15 years, then we would have 217 billion a year, and that would lead to ecological basic or basic income or ecological euro dividend of 485 euro per person yearly. So that's and that's the same as 40 euro per month. And oh, sorry, that's not the whole euro dividend. We remember 200 euros was the proposal of Philip von Paris, but it's a start and it's a big share, and other revenues from other ecological taxations or other taxations in general could complement that. So here, I don't want to go into detail here due to my time, I think. Here we see which states would be on a state level. net payers and net contributors. So here at the right side, you have the EU average, the euro per capita, and here, as I said, 480. And here you would you see the revenues when the member states themselves would share all of the revenues. So you can see who would be from a state level point of view of state level, who would be which state would be net earner, net payer. Luxembourg, for instance, and also Germany would be net payer, and poorer European countries would be net earner. A second picture, I calculated that for especially for household consumption fields like electricity and heating and mobility. So that's a similar picture here on the right. You see the average in the European Union, and here you see the CO2 per capita. When we look at these household consumption fields, the average in different member states, and here's a similar picture. The more wealthy are over average and would be net payer. When we look at the average people, that does not imply that there are many people also in Germany or Luxembourg who are, when we look at the European average, are below that. Here only the average people in member states are seen. Okay, that's the same, I showed you that. So how to start it? So I think if we launch a big proposal, we must have an idea how to start it, with which steps, and that is the following here. The current European Union legislation is that 50% of the national revenues should be used for domestic climate change prevention measures, mitigation measures, and so on. That's a recommendation, and they do it actually. So the reform of this EU legislation could be, first step could be to sample the revenues central in the European Union and using them for the Euro dividend. So the argument is there's an emission trade all over Europe, and yes, the revenues should be shared all over Europe. And yeah, to the amount I said something. Oh, wait. And so the actual revenues which are used for domestic climate change prevention measures, these measures could continue. We would have it's only 3 billion, for instance, in Germany, and don't know exact the number in overall Europe, but maybe 15 or 20 billion, sorry. But we could gain 216 billion a year. So we could do both. That's my argument, to keep the revenues for national domestic climate change prevention measures and to use the big rise in revenues to pay out a Euro dividend. And a possible first step is to give the member states a share of the overall revenues in relation to the residents, and to recommend to use this for sharing it, as it is now recommended to use 50% of the revenues for domestic climate change prevention measures. Okay, so I think that's in principle all. I've one more slide, which we have to wait for now. Oh, here. Okay. Yes. So the principle should be to start with low tax rates and then to increase it, and to start with one tax object, the CO2, that's highly legitimatic or can highly be legitimatic if we share back the revenues. And then we can extend that to other problematic uses of natural resources, as it is symbolized here, minerals or fish or other problematic overusing areas. Okay, to conclude, so the ecological euro dividend is helping the euro dividend in general. It is an entrance into the basic income as a principle. Everybody will get it. It can be made additional to the current welfare state schemes. It can be made additional also to the current very different taxing systems in the European member states. It's I tried to show that roughly. It's a libertarian environmental policy. Nothing will be forbidden. It's only become more expensive, and this is social due to the sharing back principle. And this idea would bring together environmental movement, the social solidarity movement, part of them is basic income movement, and also, not to forget, the young European movement. Okay, that's all I want to show you, and I'm sure there are some critical questions on that.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Schachtschneider. We have 2 questions at the moment. I will put them in the order they came in. So the first question is, how far are we away from an implementation of the suggestions of Mr. Schachtschneider? So how far developed is that proposal, and how is it possible to implement it, maybe?
So that's very difficult to answer. So I think I go back to this year, this slide, how to share. I think there will be a reform of the EU emission trading system. The European Commission is announcing that. And the question is, yes, what do we make with the revenues? If we make it like Macron did it, so we can risk a new yellow vest movement. So he didn't share back the revenues from the eco taxes, and then poorer people see, and I can understand that, their disadvantage. So there's a need for another mechanism, and yes, how likely it is that the European Union is thinking on the sharing back principle, I cannot say that. But they announced that, yes, there must be a just transition in the European Green Deal.
Okay, thank you. One additional question personally from me directly to that. Do you think that such a tax and sharing back proposal will be more accepted by the citizens than the current system from the CO tax, where the revenues are all lying in one budget and are not directly redistributed to the citizens? So do you think that your proposal is more acceptable for citizens?
That will depend. I think if citizens see, okay, they pay much for them, those citizens who have a big consumption of CO2 and who see they pay much and get back less, okay, maybe they are not in favor of it, but it's not so directly seen as I explained it, because the companies at first have to pay it, and then of course it and it causes price rises for the end consumer. I think it's not easy to explain this principle to people if we because we have to explain it that it is a just mechanism for the for those who are polluting less, and that are the people who are in average have less wealth. That's the scientific fact, but to explain it, it's difficult. If you try to explain it when you meet somebody from the street, okay, you see it, you have to speak much, and maybe he will not understand this. So I think that's the task we have to find a very visible and easy way to explain it.
Okay, yeah, that fits to our last questions. What are the main obstacles toward implementing such an Euro dividend?
The main obstacles, I think, okay, we first is to get legitimation for it, to explain it as a social just measure. But of course, there are some question on the legislation. The question is that in line with the European treaties? So because yes, that would be the first time that the European Union use these revenues to pay back it directly to the European citizens. So I'm not sure. That's a task for the laws, but I make the proposal that at first the member states get back this revenues in relation to their to the number of residents. So not in relation to the grandfathering principle, the historical emissions, but in relation to the number of residents. And then they get the recommendation to use this for sharing back it equally. A recommendation that's not for recommendation. I think we don't need a change of the European treaties.
Mm-hmm. So. Okay, yeah, thank you very much again for your presentation. Let's now move to our second presentation and our second speaker. Alexander de Roo is political active and also well known in the European Parliament. In the period from 1999 up to 2004, he was the most cited member of the European Parliament. He's also co-founder of Grünlinks and chairman of the Basic Income Association. His presentation on basic income, the Euro dividend, a double challenge, will focus on a politically accepted implementation strategy of a European basic income. Mr. de Roo, it's your turn now. You can start sharing your screen.
Well, I hope you can see me. I have no screen to share. I simply speak. First, let me introduce myself. I worked in the European Union between 1985, when I was 29 years old, and until 2015. So I worked as an assistant for the first Green Group in the European Parliament. I did social affairs, I did ecological affairs. I did that for 15 years. Then I was 5-year member of the European Parliament for the Dutch Greens. And after that, I worked 10 years for the provinces, for the regions in Europe, who are also lobbying in Brussels, especially on environment and energy affairs. And I founded also Basic Income European Network together with Philippe van Parijs in 1986. So that is now, 35 years ago. And I was treasurer of BIEN for the first 20 years. So I greatly admire Philippe van Parijs, my friend, and he did a very good job in starting the discussion about the Euro dividend. At the same time, as a politician and being active on the EU level, I know how difficult it is to get things changed. And in the beginning, in the 60s, there was a conference It lasted 5 days of all the 6 governments. The European Union had only 6 governments then. And the idea of the Italians was to harmonize the social benefit systems of the 6 founding states. And after 5 days and nights, it failed. Nothing was achieved. The next 20, 25 years, Europe was only busy with economy, internal market. And then it was Jacques Delors, he was a social democrat from France. He became the chair of the European Commission in 1985. And he said, we need to do something about the social side of Europe as well. Europe is too liberal, and if it has to be loved by its citizens, it also needs a social Europe. So he went around and he steered up all the trade unions in all the 15 member states at that time to demand a social Europe. And he got as far as saying, okay, we will get a social Europe, but what does it mean? It means we will harmonize the working conditions. So how much radiation your screen is going to emit, that every working place should have a window to the outside world, that we should have at least 2 weeks holiday. That is already social security, and that was difficult enough. So we have now European law saying every citizen, if you're a worker, has the right to 2 weeks holiday. In the US, there is no such legislation. Okay, but that was as far as he could come. And it was clearly said by the member states, social security is something for us. And later on, we got Tony Blair from Labour, also social democrat. He made it very clear that migrant questions and social security is a thing of the member state and not of the EU. At the same time, we as Greens said there are pressing problems like greenhouse gases, and we have to do something about it. So we demanded ecological taxes. We demanded an energy CO2 tax. But that ran into the same obstacle that taxes and social security has to be decided by unanimity. All the governments have to agree. At that time, it was 15 member states. Now, how many do we have? 27. And if the Balkan enters, we have 6 more. You can imagine it was difficult with 6 member states to agree, with 15 as well, and with 27 or even more, it's nearly impossible. But we wanted to have this energy CO2 tax. And there was a moment that it was almost realized when Töpfer, he was the minister for Germany in 1994, he said, okay, we will have an ecological tax with 11 member states, and the UK doesn't participate, they do something else. But then Minister Kohl, he was in charge in Germany, said, no, I have a secret deal with the German industry. We will do it on a voluntary way and not with a tax. But we as Greens said, we want this ecological tax. Then the Commission found a way around. They had been looking in the United States, and there you have a sulfur emission trading scheme. And the Commission cleverly said, well, we can maybe make a CO2 emission trading scheme and base that on the environmental taxes and not, base that on the environmental article of the treaty and not on the tax article. And that means you need 2/3 of the ministers and the absolute majority of the parliament to get things through. And that happened. That's why we do have now an emission trading scheme. And so basic income on a European level is very difficult to achieve because you need to overcome the unanimity at the level of the member states. And I think that is nearly impossible. And we have to start with the member states themselves. The discussion is different in different states. Like in Holland and in Finland, we have a 30-year discussion on basic income. And in other countries like Germany, it's more recent. We have to be pragmatic because the basic income has to mean something, and it has to be better than the present social welfare system. For instance, in Holland, a long-time unemployed person gets 1,200 euros per month, plus benefit for your housing, 350 euros social housing benefit. So that person has already quite a lot of money. And if we say simply 1,000 euro basic income for everybody in Holland, or 800 euros for all of Europe, that doesn't appeal to the people who are presently receiving more. And we cannot say as a basic income movement, well, those people will simply earn less in the future. So that's why in Holland we came up with a proposal, basic income 2.0. We propose, and in countries like Holland or Finland or Germany, every adult gets 600 euros and each household gets 600 euros. That means if you're an individual, you get 1,200, basically the same amount as now. And if you're together, you get 1,800 euros. That is more than you get as an old age pension or a social benefit in Holland. So that it becomes attractive. Then it also becomes attractive to live together, whether you have a relationship or not. That is the way we propose to change things. And in Holland, we have a social crisis now. The government fell over the supplements, because we have not only a supplement for housing, but we also have a supplement for care, and we have a supplement for children, and we have other supplements. And there was one big mess, and 30,000 people got wrongly accused and had to pay back a lot of tax money. And that has been going on the television and in the lives of people now for more than 2 years. So the politicians are now looking for a new way out. And it is likely that we will get a kind of negative income tax of about 250 euros per month for every adult citizen in Holland. And if you're poor, you get it on your account every month. If you're rich, it's simply incorporated in your taxes. So we hope to expand that system. It has to be decided, but even the biggest party, the right-wing liberals of Mark Rutte, have secretly said they are in favor of this proposal. And they have now for the first time said that they want to raise the minimum wage. They have never ever said that since they were founded in 1948, because they're a right-wing conservative liberal party. But they said they are in favor of this new system. So we have maybe a crack in the system, and we might be able to tinker it around. But that's on a national level. On the EU level, it's very, very difficult. I admire the proposal of Ulrich to come with an ecological dividend of basically 40 euros per household. That would indeed be a possibility. But the only realistic way forward is to say, we change the EU ETS system and we recommend the member states that they did give the money they earn out directly to all the citizens. There is a president in Canada, Mr. Trudeau, who is the prime minister. He signed up to the Paris Treaty, and he was encountered with 4 of his 7 provinces which did not go very fast with CO2 reductions. So he introduced a national CO2 tax, and he gave it back to every citizen through the income tax. And it showed that the lowest 70% was financially better off, and the highest 30%, which consume more CO2, which Ulrich brilliantly showed with his graphs, they have to pay off these taxes. So that is now introduced in Canada, and that works well. And we should propagate that as well. The German Greens have proposed Energiegeld, energy money, an energy supplement, which should be the same amount for everybody. And I calculated in Holland, what we could do will be roughly around 100 euros. And because we have now higher energy prices, the politicians are struggling to find a way out. And the way out is not to lower the energy taxes or to lower the price of energy. No, the way forward is based on the basic income idea to give an equal revenue to everybody, which would be around 80 to 100 euros. If you combine that with the 40 euros from Ulrich, that's 120, maybe 100, a little bit more, still not enough. But I always say the present social system was not built in one day. In Germany, they started with Bismarck. Who the hell remembers who was Bismarck? You might have seen it in your school books, a guy with a beard a long time ago. So 150 years it's been building up the social system, and we will have to reform it, and the reform will take some time. It will have the basic income or the ecological dividend will not be realized from one day to the other, but the pressures are mounting, and I think this is the way forward. Ask and demand an energy money, ask and demand an ecological benefit from your own government. That's basically what I have to say. Thank you very much.
So I'm now unmuted. Many thanks for your interesting presentation or your interesting speech. As far as I see, we have at the moment 2 smaller questions. One question would be taking the case that, for example, Germany or France will start with implementing a national UBI. Do you think that this procedure leads other states in the Europe to follow with the UBI implementation?
That's a very good question. Yes, I do think if one state in the European Union or even outside the European Union, for instance, Switzerland, where they have a new referendum, introduces a basic income, other member states will follow. Because it's a big argument now. Oh, it's never been realized. Okay, you have Alaska, you may have one tribe in the United States with a kind of basic income, but not on a big scale. And if one member state leads the way, Finland or Germany, doesn't matter which state, then there will be a lot of pressure. And you also see in history that changes happen on the same time in different countries at the same time. Of course, there's one country which will be the first, and that will be a big example. And while we are part of the basic income, no longer European network, but basic income Earth network. So 2 years ago, we were in India, and there were people from the Sikkim Democratic Front. That's a small state inside India. And there in the last period, they introduced only ecological farming is allowed. And now they wanted to introduce a basic income. But they lost the vote with only a few thousand votes. Otherwise, they would have already introduced their basic income in their mountainous states next to Nepal, based on a tax on tourists. And I thought, well, he was being negative, saying we lost the elections. No, the guy was very optimistic. He said in 5 years, we will come back not only in our own state, Sikkim, but in 6 or 7 other mountainous states in India. We will do the same thing. We will tax the tourist and give that money straight to everybody. And if you have that kind of examples, then the movement will become unstoppable.
Okay, these are good news for us. The second question, do you think that the UBI is more implementable in richer states than in poorer states, or the other way around?
That is a difficult question. Well, we had a reunion 5 years ago with the people who founded Basic Income European Network. And I asked the same question to everybody: which will be the first country, India or Finland or Canada or Holland? Well, it's very difficult to say, because in Holland or in Western Europe, the money is there. It's simply reforming of what we have already. In Holland, the Ministry of Social Affairs calculated there are 50 different ways of getting money to the Dutch citizens. And 80 to 90% of the Dutch citizens somehow 90% gets one of those or more of those 50 ways to channel money back. So the money is there already, but it's the legacy of the old system, and especially the political parties which build up the old system, the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats. They very like their own baby. They don't want to throw it away. But you see now in Holland, but also now in Germany, Social and Christian Democrats, well, they just managed to have 50% of the vote. In Holland, it's down to less than 20%. So you have new parties which are not having this legacy of the past. At the same time, it could go very fast in new countries, like in Korea. We have had a meeting in Korea, and there's one guy who's running now for president. and he is one of the guys from the leading party. In the polls, sometimes he's #1. And he says if he becomes president next year, he will introduce a basic income, giving 420 euros to all the people in South Korea. And if that happens, well, then Korea is the first country to go.
Okay. So maybe we can summarize or say that the richer countries in general had the money to implement the UBI, but they had something in mind or some legacies to our system that they will not implement it soon. And the poorer countries, maybe they would implement it, but they have not the money. Or can I summarize it like this? Yes.
And then maybe one remark, you have 30 countries which we qualify as a failed state, where the government is not really controlling the government, the tax collection is not working, etc. So one idea would be is that the development aid of the 30 richest countries goes to the 30 poorest countries and is handed out in the form of a basic income or a cash transfer or whatever you name it to those citizens in those 30 states. And that would not even need to raise the developing money which we spend now. It would simply mean transforming what we are giving already. And in that way, we could give a basic income to all the citizens of the globe.
Okay, thank you. We have one last question from Peter Brake. I think you know him because he thanks Alexander. The unemployment payment of your 75% of your previous job, is this an insurance paid for?
In Holland, it's an insurance. So all the people who are employed pay a small part of the salary, and that's lumped together in unemployment money. And if you're unemployed, then you get it. But the problem is only 50% has a regular job now, and the other 50% either has a flex job or no job. And for them, the old system doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We have one question to Ulrich Schachtschneider again, but I will put this question at the very end, or should we put it now? What are the suggestions? Ulrich, what do you prefer?
We can try to answer it now. So. Okay.
So just read the questions. The Greens would be happy with the 50% domestic climate change mitigation. Is there some reluctance to transferring this tax into Euro dividend?
Yeah, of course. When I'm talking to Greens, I'm making this proposal, this question sometimes come. So they have the idea to take the revenues to finance climate mitigation measures, of course. But as I tried to show you, if we make this European trade emission system so big that we include all, that we reach a price of 100 euro per ton, then the revenue will be 50 times higher than today. So, and then we can keep the ongoing financing of climate mitigation measures, and in parallel, we have a lot of money to finance this sharing back. It's not the whole Euro dividend. Alexander says that this 40 euro is only a little addition, of course, but I want to stress that that's the basic idea of Philip von Paradise too. He was thinking about a small basic layer the European Union can give in order to fulfill the subsidiarity principle. The European Union cannot make the whole basic income. So I totally agree to Alexander, but that's exactly the proposal.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Then let's go on to our last presentation, which is held by Otto Lüdemann. For more than 20 years, Mr. Lüdemann was a teaching professor in the field of education. In addition to his membership in the International Irish Farm Society, Mr. Lüdemann has been actively involved in the basic income movement since 2009 and co-initiated, among others, the European Citizens Initiative in 2013 and the International Conference on Basic Income and Degrowth. He will report on a pilot project of a European UBI. Mr. Lüdemann, you have to unmute yourself. You can begin.
Okay. So I hope you can hear me. It's okay? Yeah. Indeed, I want to present a pilot project for a European basic income. But before doing so, I would like to take into account the fact that my internet connection is very bad. So I will take off the video and speak only in my micro. So the title is Pilot Project for a European Basic Income. As the title indicates, the proposal for a pilot project to be presented here aims at an unconditional European basic income to be introduced in the medium term. The underlying policy proposal comes not from myself, but from Dominic Afsharian, a research officer at the Institute for Political Science at the University of Tübingen in Germany. He worked on it together with other colleagues. As Dominic is prevented from participating here today, he asked me to present the idea of this pilot. Like Dominic, I am indeed of the opinion that such a pilot project can be particularly profitable if it is based on a concrete policy proposal. In this way, on the one hand, the experimental setup of the pilot project can be designed as realistically as possible. And on the other hand, the underlying policy proposal can be optimized ex post by the insights gained. The policy proposal of Afsharian and his colleagues involves a relatively large number of detailed considerations. Therefore, in the following, I will try to summarize only those central elements that serve as a basis for the pilot project proposal. For a detailed derivation and discussion of the policy, please refer to the underlying publication, which is foreseen in the near future. Maybe I can just make a remark in the meantime, thinking to the contribution of Alexander. I think indeed that the proposal of Dominic Afsharian is a little bit in opposition to the skepticism of Alexander. He is more optimistic, but he is also pragmatic. And maybe in this sense, it could be an interesting discussion between Dominic and Alexander. But let us have a look on this, on his proposal through this idea of a pilot to introduce it. At its core, the policy proposal provides for monthly payment to all citizens and permanent residents of the EU. The amount of these payments would be based on national poverty risk thresholds. That means 60% of the national median income or 50% of the national average income. The higher value would determine the level of the UBI. To grant sufficiency in low-income member states, to ensure affordability and promote upward convergence, no UBI would be below 20% or above 60% of the EU-wide median income. For individual incomes above a country's median income, the automatically paid UBI would be reduced linearly, but individuals could still receive the full rate of the UBI if they actively requested it. This mechanism, therefore, merely acts as a nudge to reduce payment rates for higher income groups if those affected consider the payment to be individually unnecessary. According to these considerations, a pilot project would orient the monthly amount of the UBI to the criteria mentioned. In order to examine the effects of the above-mentioned upper and lower limits, the participating countries for a study should be selected in such a way that the median income in at least one country is below, for instance, Bulgaria or Romania, between Latvia or Malta, and above, for example, Germany or France, the limits mentioned. In this context, it must be legally examined to what extent a trial UBI could be paid out in the participating countries without the recipients losing other social benefit entitlements or having to pay higher taxes overall. These cases must be avoided in order to ensure actual additionality. The participants within these countries should also cover heterogeneous income strata and be selected in such a way that the effects of the aforementioned nudge mechanism can be analyzed. Since the underlying policy proposal is to pay the full amount of the UBI to adults, is to pay the full amount of the UBI to adults and to distribute slightly reduced rates for minors to persons entitled to custody. A representative sample should also include these criteria. A gradual introduction is proposed, starting with very low UBI rates and increasing them over time. Furthermore, such a pilot project would need a control group that is equally observed but does not receive a UBI. In order to observe actual changes in behavior, participants would have to be observed before payments begin. However, since ex-ante certainty about participation could cause behavioral changes already at this point, participants may not yet know whether they will be part of the UBI recipients or the control group. The potential effects of the UBI that are relevant to the study are manifold and can be oriented towards the arguments for and against the UBI summarized in the underlying publication. However, some factors stand out. With regard to a UBI in general, a pilot project should keep an eye on changes in socioeconomic and related indicators, such as poverty, unemployment, total income, and educational performance and participation. In addition, the individual use of the UBI, satisfaction and health indicators, as well as behavioral changes, for example, work behavior, leisure time, family planning, sustainability behavior, consumption patterns, social behavior, political and social participation, voting behavior, political preferences, risk-taking, and so on. All this would be relevant for investigation. Moreover, since a European UBI is often justified by reducing Euroscepticism, the study of attitudes towards the EU and the European UBI over time would also be of great interest. Beyond these aspects, various macro-level arguments also play a role in UBI debates. For example, regarding the labor market, price developments, and system stability. But these cannot be tested in a pilot project in view of the multi-layered objects of observation, interdisciplinary scientific project support from the disciplines of political science, economics, sociology, psychology, and pedagogical disciplines such as educational science would be desirable. Allow me to add a personal reflection on what for me is the attraction of such a pilot project proposal. Let us assume that the project presented here would actually be implemented with selected representative target groups in at least 3 or perhaps more countries. Furthermore, let us assume that the results would confirm the expectation that the participants' Euroscepticism would decrease significantly and that their interest in a politically and socially truly integrated Europe would increase measurably. Would this not inevitably lead to a radical questioning of the priorities of European social policy, which have so far been oriented towards national interests? Wouldn't the European Commission's limited competence in the field of social policy, as laid down in the European treaties, and the principle of anonymity in decisions finally have to be reviewed? It may well be that in those countries that do not have the experience of such a pilot project, resistance to such demands would initially be all the stronger. But at least there would then be a real EU-wide debate on the basic income with an open outcome. Finally, one may trust that obviously positive and productive experience with the UBI will get around in the EU. In an extreme case, the countries with such positive experiences could even come up with the idea of taking a special path together by founding a new core Europe for themselves with their own rules of the game and leaving it up to the others to decide whether they want to join or not. Without considering such a development desirable, especially since it would initially also mean a sensitive step backwards for European integration, the centrifugal forces in Europe are now so strong that we shouldn't rule out the possibility of such a scenario from the outset. After all, it would not be the first time that Europe has only made progress by taking a diversion. That's what it is. Thank you.
Many thanks, Otto Lüdemann, for your speech or your presentation and the short report on the proposal. One question, which is more general one, and I'm interested at the answer of Ulrich Schachtschneider and Alexander de Roux also, but I start with you. How high should the European UBI be? Participatory in the respective country or in equal shares? When we are talking about the European UBI, this is an interesting question. I think when we're talking, for example, about 200 euros per month, which could be possible as a UBI on a European level in Romania, this would be enough to participate in the society. In Germany, this would be an amount which is too low to have any social insurances or something which can be substituted by this amount. So maybe we start with you, Otto Lüdemann.
Well, it's obviously difficult to answer. As I know, I'm not quite sure. Maybe Ulrich is better informed about the idea of Dominic Afsharian. But I think anyway, he thinks also to a UBI which progressively will be higher step by step, and there's not a fixed sum from the beginning, but there is nevertheless an indication, rather precise, because he speaks in his publication about the idea of at least 60% of the median income and 50% of the average income. So this gives two informations. It's at least a sum of some €100, different according to the countries, to the economic power and the living standard in the different countries. And the second information is just about this difference he makes between the poor and the rich countries. I think this is very important to take into account the possibilities of the people in the different countries and their living standard.
Okay, maybe the opinion from Schachtschneider and Deru also would be great.
Yeah, I think yes, the proposal of Dominic Afsharian is, as Otto Lüdemann explained, to make it step by step and to start, for instance, with €200. That's for, as you said, for a resident of Romania. It's enough to participate in society, but not in Germany. But the argument from Dominic is, when I understood him correctly, that is exactly a redistribution in Europe, which is just, because the richer northwestern countries, the member states, would pay these €200 for the person in Romania, or would pay more, a higher share to reach that. Yeah, is that a good proposal when it is not enough in Germany? When I understood the proposal from Dominic Afsharian correctly, there's a maximum of the European finance basic income of 50% of the, I think 50% of the European, not average, median income, sorry, yeah, 50% maximum. And of course, then in Germany, I don't know the correct number, but that's below 60% of German median income, which is normally the definition of a participatory basic income. I don't know if this proposal of Dominic Afsharian is also meant as an subsidiary, following the subsidiarity principle, that the European Union is giving a basic layer and the member states could add something. I'm not sure. Yeah, but the idea is to have a redistribution at the European scale. I think that's the main idea. And to start with those who have the biggest need. So when we start with 200, so for a person in Romania, it's much more useful as for a person in Germany, but also a poor person in Germany would have a benefit.
Yeah. Alexander de Roo, what's your opinion?
Yeah, well,
Sharing.
I have a bit different opinion. I mean, the average wage in Bulgaria is around 300 euros. So if you have 200 euros euro dividend, then the difference between the euro dividend and the average wage is too small. And if you get a 200 euro dividend in Holland, the right-wing government, the first thing they will do is they will reduce all social expenditure with 200 euros because they will already get from Europe. And they don't, the right-wing government doesn't want the poor people to earn more money. No, that's the opposite they want. So it is politically very, very difficult. And okay, the idea of redistribution is also incorporated. And it was started by the UK in the 70s. They said we need to have a regional fund. The regions in Europe which do not have a lot of money, they should be helped to build up their economy. And there's a lot of criticism how the European regional funds work. But that is the idea, to help them to build up the economy. And still much more money from the regional funds is going to Poland and Romania and Bulgaria than is going to Holland or Belgium or Germany. So that's not ideal either, but I think politically it will be very, very, very difficult to get such a thing. And about the average income, yeah, well, 50% of average income, the average net income in Holland is about 2,500 euros. So, yeah, then 200 euros is not a lot. At the same time, well, that's what we'd be arguing. If you say 1,000 euros for everybody, when they have two persons, you have 2,000 euros. That's already pretty close to the average. So that's why we make and insist on making a difference between an individual and a couple. And we also have that in our old age pension, because we have already in Holland a basic income for old age pensioners. Even if you have never worked, done any labor your whole life, you will get a basic income in Holland when you turn 66, and you keep it until you die. But that is different from a person to a couple. A person gets around 1,100 and a couple gets 1,600. But okay, that's realpolitik. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Are there some questions between you as speakers? I think Ulrich Schachtschneider had one.
Yeah, okay. I have a question to Otto, to the pilot conception. So I agree totally that we need pilots, and I agree also totally to the idea to have a broad evaluation, not only the question whether the benefiters will join the labor market less or more, but all the other evaluation issues you mentioned on their ecological behavior and their idea on Europe and other things. I agree totally. But the problem could be that in this pilots, the funding side is not pictured. So, okay, for sure, people will have a positive evaluation. They get this basic income and they say, okay, that was good for me, for my life, and so on. But yes, the question will come that, yes, that's only half of the story. And how in a in the big European-based pilot, this financing side could be integrated.
Yeah, I think you know yourself, you are the best man to know yourself how difficult it is already to present, to analyze this problem for the euro dividend and for basic income. I think if you have to simulate this financing question within a pilot, this will be probably not possible to create a very credible simulation. So it's a handicap that a pilot cannot do that probably, but at the end, I would say the advantages of a pilot nevertheless are there, and we have to accept this handicap.
Yeah, thank you. That's always the question, what's the usage of pilot projects? But I think we all agree that we can have some insights on behavior under UBI, or somehow behavior under UBI. So see also there are some advantages of pilot projects. One other question to Mr. Lüdemann. With your proposed UBI pilot, did you already receive some feedback from the political actors? Do you think that we are on a good way to have such a pilot in the near future?
I can say no, I have no feedback, because today this is in a way the first opportunity to present it in a public way. So it's a very new proposal, so I have no feedback for the moment.
Okay, I think this is connected to the next question. Someone asked if it's possible to get a link to a PDF or something on the proposal. So I think that's not possible at the moment, or?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you know when this will be online so that interested people can read it?
No, the problem is it's a policy proposal of Dominic is not yet published. And,
okay.
But this is on the way. He promised that it probably could be published still this year. So this is all what I can tell for the moment, because we are in discussion with him, but I have no definite information about that.
Okay. So, but we will be updated if the proposal comes online, and I think we can share it on our FRIBIS homepage also, so that our interested people are informed about it. We have some.
I think you are in connection with Dominic also at FRIBIS, so you will have the information, I think.
Yes, great. So we are at the very end of our time today. We have time for one or two more smaller questions. Have you, as speakers, some questions remaining to discuss, or? Yeah, Ulrich.
First, a short remark. You can read this pilot project proposal in the forthcoming, unfortunately only German publication, Europa für Grundeinkommen, Grundeinkommen für Europa, with me, Mr. Neumerker, and Otto Lüdemann as editors. So maybe we will have a second edition then in English. That's only one remark. And the question, more difficult, I think, on Otto, and also on Dominic, but he's not here. He wants to finance the whole amount on a European level. So when I understood it correctly, and yes, that would cause a change in European treaties. Alexander said how difficult this is, and yes, so that's my big skepticism. So I agree to this big European basic income, but yes, with which taxes and yes, and how anonymity will be reached to agree on many new taxes on a European level. So my proposal was very reduced in this belonging. So as Alexander said, it was only, it is related to environmental policy as a current part of the European treaties, and it's just another use of the revenues of this environmental policy European trade emission system. And yes, seeing this proposal, there are many new taxes. So yes, how to reach that?
Alexander.
Yeah, if I may, when I was still a member of parliament, we argued for a taxes on the border, a border tax adjustment. If Europe goes forward with energy transition and the others do not, then we import products which are basically ecologically unsound. So we should put a levy on that. And then the big question is, what do you do with that money? Well, 20 years ago, we were laughed away. Now that's an official proposal by the European Commission. And that will earn a lot of money as well if it's introduced. But of course, there are questions about WTO. Should all the money remain in Europe, or should be part of the money be sent back to the countries which produce, for instance, steel in not an ecological way, and they should then make their steel in an ecological way? But it is a possible source, and the Commission is hesitating to really put it on the table, although they have promised to do it, but it will be a new source of direct income for the European Union.
Okay, many thanks. I think this is a good last statement because our time is running now. I would like to thank you all the speakers and also all the listeners for their time today. And I wish our all some exciting presentations to come until the end of the conference today. So many thanks again to Ulrich Schachtschneider, to Otto Lüdemann, and to Alexander de Roo for today. And we will see us in other sessions, hopefully.